Senator Paterson.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I am very pleased to be rising to speak in support of this bill, as it goes to the core of one of the issues that I came here to fight for and that I spoke about in my maiden speech, and that is the dignity of work. The economic benefits of work are obvious. A steady paycheck provides financial security for individuals and their families, and it allows them to plan for the future with confidence. Material living standards like these should never be lightly dismissed. Of course, it also provides tax receipts for government, which allows us to fund the important things that we all value, like a strong national defence and a social safety net. But in some ways, even more important than these financial benefits are the other benefits that come with work, often described as the dignity of work. I want to briefly dwell on these important philosophical points before I turn to how this bill supports this objective and some reflections on why it is particularly needed in my home state of Victoria. The concept of the dignity of work is most closely associated with Catholic theology. As senators may know, I'm not personally religious, but I have a strong appreciation for these social teachings. The concept has been very well summarised by John Coleman for the Jesuit Review of America when he writes, "Work not only implies remuneration sufficient for adequate housing, food, medical help, etc., but also involves a kind of justice as participation. Through work we participate in society and have an active voice. Thus, even if welfare for those who cannot find work or cannot do it for physical reasons is a good thing, it is no substitute for the dignity which accrues to those who actively participate in work and in society." This is strongly supported by the evidence available to us from social science research. We know that people engaged in paid employment report much higher levels of seemingly unrelated measures of well-being. They are happier, they are healthier, and they are better connected to their communities than people without work. This shouldn't surprise us if we reflect on what it means to have a job. A job does not just provide an income and opportunities for socialisation and engagement, but a sense of self-belief and confidence. As humans, we have a deep need to be needed by others, to be of value to them. Of course, it is possible to fulfil this need outside of work, for example, in our families, through civil society, but for most people there is no substitute for paid employment in delivering this sense of value. For many people, the routine and the obligations that are imposed on us by work provides the healthy structure that we need to thrive. Conversely, we also know that unemployment can have a profoundly negative effect on your health and happiness. In particular, long-term unemployment we know is terrible for our sense of pride as well as our connection to community and our health and happiness. It truly is a social evil which must be fought. Sadly, we also know that coming out of an economic crisis like this one, which has been caused by COVID-19, and of course the tough restrictions that have been imposed by government in order to fight the health crisis, many more Australians will be without work and all that comes with it, all that dignity that comes with it. No more so, sadly, than in my home state of Victoria, which has been hit particularly hard thanks to the second long and very painful lockdown that we have endured. There will be many more job losses and business failures as a result in Victoria than in the rest of the country. Right now, there are more than 500,000 Victorians who've lost their jobs since the beginning of this crisis. While the rest of the country has been recovering because they were able to get on top of the health challenges posed by COVID-19 and they didn't encounter the issues that we unfortunately have in Victoria with hotel quarantine, which re-released the virus into the community after Victoria had effectively achieved elimination of the virus like all other states and territories. ABS figures show that Victoria has continued to decline in the second half of this year. 73,000 Victorians were laid off in just August and September alone, while another 81,000 left the labour force completely. These are those potential discouraged workers who have left and are no longer seeking any further employment. Another 58,000 of them had their hours reduced, and 112,000 Victorians who were employed in September did not work any hours at all, often either stood down from their employment or in so-called zombie firms being supported by JobKeeper for now, but which we know will not be viable forever and in perpetuity. At 14.9%, Victoria's underemployment rate is the highest in the nation. That's a combination of those who are sadly without work at all and many others who are seeking more work than they can currently obtain, more hours than they are currently being given. The bitter experience from previous recessions that we know is that even when economies do bounce back quickly, at least in terms of GDP growth figures and other metrics, and bump out of that technical recession of 2 negative quarters, and we certainly hope that's the case in Australia this time around, it still takes many years, many years to regain the pre-crisis levels of employment that we had. That's not just the experience in Australia, but internationally. Employment, sadly, is a lagging indicator of an economic recovery, and given the importance of employment to people's dignity and self-worth, it is so important that we speed up that process as quickly as possible. Sadly, we know that some people will leave the workforce during this time and never to re-enter it. They will go on to other forms of support like the disability support pension or the old age pension or New Start and never return to the employment market at all. And particularly hard hit by recessions are young people. Young people who graduate from school or other forms of tertiary education in a recession take longer to find a job, are paid less and have fewer opportunities for advancement than their peers who graduate in better times. It truly is a lottery of timing. Through no fault of their own, just the time that they were born and the time that they were graduating from education, if they happen to graduate in a recession, we know that they'll suffer significantly reduced economic opportunities as a result. And it can take decades to overcome this so-called scarring of the labour market. Programs like the JobMaker hiring credit are not the solution on their own, but they do form an important part of a package of wider reforms which are designed to get people back into work as soon as possible. Along with personal income tax cuts, incentives for businesses to invest, record infrastructure spending, the JobMaker hiring credit will spur the creation of new jobs to combat this evil of unemployment. Now, wider economic reforms will also be necessary, including to industrial relations, to ensure there are as few barriers as possible to job creation. Like many, I am eagerly awaiting the outcome of the Industrial Relations Minister's consultation with business and unions, and I'm hopeful that some of the old rivalries which we know have dominated these debates and prevented reform in the past will be able to be put aside to ensure our economy is freed up as much as possible to create new jobs. It is remarkable to reflect for a moment and think that the Fair Work Act, which we operate in now, which was enacted by the Rudd government shortly after it came to office in 2007, has largely remained untouched and unchanged for 13 years. There's been no progress at all on industrial relations in that time, and I think it is clearly going to be a barrier to that bounce back if it is not addressed. So I'll be eagerly awaiting the reforms that I hope come with consensus between business unions and government out of that reform discussion led by Christian Porter. The JobMaker hiring credit will support around 450,000 positions for young Australians, and it will cost about $4 billion. Each additional employee aged 16 to 29 years of age will attract a credit of $200 a week for their employer, or $100 a week for workers who are aged 30 to 35. Contributions by other senators in this chamber, including Senator Waters prior to me, there will be a range of safeguard mechanisms in place both in this legislation, in the subsequent regulations issued by the Treasurer and the existing protections that exist under the Fair Work Act through the Fair Work Commission that will ensure that this money goes only to the creation of new jobs and that existing workers are not disadvantaged or displaced in any way by this scheme. There is no reason to think that they will be, because many employers are reporting, in fact, a difficulty finding appropriate workers and a desire to add to their employment, as they indeed will be required to under this legislation in order to receive a benefit. They will have to demonstrate a net increase in their employment. So there's no reason to think that those fears will be realised, but just in case, the government will of course be putting in place very strong safeguards to ensure that doesn't happen. To briefly recap, the JobMaker hiring credit is one really important part of the Treasurer's plan set out in the budget a month ago to get Australia to build back better after this crisis, to bounce back as quickly as possible and to return to the strong and prosperous economy we enjoyed before this unanticipated crisis hit from overseas. It was unfortunately unavoidable that Australia, along with every other country in the world, would suffer some form of recession as a result of this crisis and the measures we had to put in place to safeguard Australians' health. However, we can make sure that on the other side we get back to that level of prosperity and security for Australians by giving them both the economic benefits of work but also all those social associated benefits of work and the dignity of work. Thank you.
Senator Griff.